All right. I think we're good. I think we're up and running. So thanks everybody for joining and welcome Marius, CEO of Tyremax. And look, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to let us sort of help your team and enabling them through, I suppose, better data, but we're going to talk about better metrics. And I'll get to that. Emily Kuchikalic, our MC, lead question asker. Is that a official role, Em? So I'm going to let you do most of it. I will keep an eye on Q&A from the audience. And look, I've learnt my lessons through these webinars. Just to put it out there, the chat is not for questions and answers. I think the chat is actually disabled. If you've got any questions, and I'm sure lots of people will, please use the Q&A, and I'll sort of share them with Emily and Marius. So we'll kick off. But before we kick off, Em, I wouldn't mind just sort of saying why I wanted Marius to, I suppose, speak with us. And there was really two reasons. One was, in a world where we get a lot of requests to build data platforms and AI apps, sometimes it's sort of like you're looking for golden nuggets. And I suppose, Marius, when we started working together, we sort of honed in on this. You called it metrics that matter. And I used to call it closely watched numbers. By the way, I prefer your branding of it. So I've taken that, metrics that matter, because it provides focus. And I think that was probably what we, straight away we gelled over of, if you don't really know what drives the business, how do you know what data you need? How do you know what AI apps to build, etc.? And I think that's what we'll share a lot about today. But also my personal experience leading into this many, many years ago, being, I suppose, the data guy at large organizations. It used to be very frustrating when execs used to have 50 insight PowerPoint packs, probably about 3 or 4 of them. So that's like nearly 200 insights a month, large teams trying to cobble them together, and they probably didn't even read them, let alone draw the line of sight to frontline staff for it to make a difference. So I suppose that's what I'm going to hand over to you and Em to talk through, not just the executive dashboard, how you got the ELT aligned, but then getting to the shop floor with metrics that matter. So, Em, that's why I've got Marius on the call. So over to you, Em.
Well, I think it's kind of his first question. Let's go, Marius. So do you want to sort of explain your philosophy behind it?
Yeah, so listen, it's a privilege being here, and I've had the opportunity working for many companies over the years. So nothing we're going to talk about today, I can take any let's call it creatorship or ownership of. But the one thing I was exposed consistently working through multinationals is you got to have one eye on the telescope and one eye on the microscope. Now, the telescope part, people normally have down pat because that's the strategy and it's the blue sky thinking, etc. But it's the one eye on the microscope part. And that's where metrics that matter come in. It's actually a concept that emanates all the way back to Peter Drucker and some of his books he wrote in the 60s. Is you have to be obsessive around clarity, because that's what metrics that matter is about. It's the clarity and simplicity to make sure everybody is aligned and going in the same direction. Else there's no point looking at the telescope.
Sticks out to me when I read all the material and talk to Haj and then speaking with you. I'm going to use the term old school. You're going to hate me for it, but it's quite old school, right? It's this, I'm so used to in the world, AI, everyone's talking about data and data. And if you can't talk Python, somehow you're a fool. Yep. But our conversations had nothing to do with that. It was, how do I make my business hum, and how do I make the individuals who work in my business understand how the business is humming? Can you talk through some of that and how you kind of bridge the gap between the data science side of it and then the practical application of gathering all that data?
Yeah, so it starts with creating a North Star. It's once again, it's a concept that is quite prevalent in Jim Collins' studies, and even Patrick Lencioni and a lot of others talk about this. So foundationally, it's our values, our purpose is how we bring our values to life in the business. But on top of the North Star sits our mission. And if you think about it, that's the ultimate metric that matters. It's kind of, who do you want to be when you grow up? It's like the kitten looking in the mirror, seeing a lion. Now, you got to visualize that, and it can be old school, whatever, but it's the things that dream propels our lives on a daily basis. So you got to find that anchoring point. because no AI or machine learning or extensive workshops are going to give that for you. So that starts at the core of setting it there, and then starting to say, what is the essential metrics that give us the health or the pulse of the business to achieve that? How do we know whether we are going in the right direction?
So you defined them with Ignite, or you defined them yourself and then went to Ignite and said, now find me the data.
Yeah, so we define that on our own. It's kind of what's core to our business, what kind of makes us get out of bed every morning. And once you have that, then you go to something like Ignite, and Ignite actually gave us a win in two levels. The one part was, yes, sure, it's the metrics, fleshing through that and working through the definitions and whatever. But the other thing, and this is why we like partnering with Ignite and other service provider for that same matter, is it's keeping the scope tight, because it's in the name itself. It's the metrics that matter. And so while we were taking this one pinnacle metric and breaking it down into just the essential ones, not the 3, 4, 500, it's the ones that will actually count. You easily, as you go through your data sources that's available for you, you can get lost in all of this metrics that you can go after. And that's the part we liked about working with Ignite. And like I said, other partners do similar for us. Keep on bringing us back to you. Engage us originally to get core elements. Don't get distracted. Just take these 5 or these 10. And the thing is, don't change them. Don't change them constantly. We only have an annual review cycle.
Well, that's what I was going to say. How are you sure that the metrics you started to gather were right? And then how are you sure that, so presumably you said, I want to measure, and you talk about 5 key things.
Yeah.
And how did you work out what the right data is to create those metrics? Because presumably you've then got a whole pile of data you can gather to make those measures.
Yeah, so for us, so there's the good old, if you take 5, there's 3 of them is actually already defined for you, because they come out of any MBA, Harvard textbook you can find. So it's the lifeblood of the business. You've got to grow earnings, you've got to have cash flow, and you've got to have return on your funds employed. So those are the 3 essential ones. And the other 2 is normally closely linked to your economic engine. Is it sales per square meter? Is it a margin, or it's a normalization factor, sales per full-time equivalent, a number of insights generated in a week or whatever? And those 5 eventually will distill down to the next 10 and the next 15. And so it sits at a cascading level inside the organization. Now, you won't get it right necessarily perfectly the first time, and we recognize that, and the conditions of the business also changes. So once a year, and we're actually going into that cycle now, in the month of September and October, we relook at those 5 essential ones at the top and say, are they let's call it the horse that's pulling the cart?
You, I suppose through your ELT, I suppose translated the North Star, the 3+2, and that sort of gave you that guidance. But then there's the bringing people's objectives and scorecards, turning them into true metrics that matter as well, to join those dots. Can you elaborate? Because I mean, I think that's a really important part. We talk about cascading metrics a lot, but to actually put it into the rhythms and the heartbeat of an organization is different. Yes,
Harsh, and it's a great point to interject on. So got to explain that a little bit more, because we're talking a lot about the metrics and creating them and reporting them. But what we actually do is we annually set scorecards by each individual. Every single one of the almost 500 people that work in Tyremax has a recorded quality one-on-one discussion every month. So we generate 500 scorecards, and they sit at various degrees of complexity. If you're a driver or something in the warehouse, you'll have a tailored scorecard, but it will be a generic format. If you are a regional sales manager, you will have one. And so what we do is once we have the North Star and we divide those initial 5 ones, then we start, and I'll use an example. We will start looking at return on funds employed. And that has a top line, which is all about earnings, and the bottom line, which is about working capital. And we'll be saying inventory. Inventory is very important in terms of determining your funds employed. So the supply chain manager might have number of stock days cover. The guy that's in the warehouse might have a percentage of losses on his inventory. And so as we then triage the health of return on funds employed, we use the metrics that matter that ignites built fast, and that feeds into that monthly scorecard. So what happens is when we sit down for a one-on-one, the line manager, the team member comes with his scorecard, and there's only 3 or 4 that he or she can truly influence, and they have visibility of through the data web portal you guys built for us, and they pre-populate. They populate their scorecard themselves, and when they sit down, they say, oh, I'm a little bit short on my inventory losses here, but I'm actually doing better in terms of my pick accuracies. And that's how it becomes full circle. So you've got this golden thread or golden yardstick running through the business, which we, let's call it, calibrate or tune once a year. And then we set scorecards for the year, and we check against that golden yardstick every 4 weeks.
I mean, I suppose, and that way everybody knows the contribution they're making to the organisation.
Well, and
right?
I remember when we went through it, Marius, you talked about making sure that each individual's KPIs have 3 elements to them: the visibility, the sphere of control. Do you want to talk a bit about that? Because that's important too.
So the scorecard has 3 discrete sections. The first one is very, very simple. It is generic for every single person in the business, and it's a true financial measurement. It's got our earnings growth, it's got our free cash flow, and it's got our return on funds employed. And it has a certain weight in the scorecard depending on where you sit in the organization. So if you're a senior leader, it will have a bigger weight. If you're a more junior person, that will diminish quite a bit. The second part is also very quantitative measurements. Quantitative measurements. And so there is 2 ones that are generic, and that is around team engagement and net promoter score towards customers, but they will be region specific. They won't be an enterprise metric. So it's if I'm in New South Wales or my New Zealand, and then at most they'll have another 3 that sit as part of that. So you've got 3 at the top and 5. So you've got 8 at a maximum 8 qualitative measurements, and they are measured out of the metrics that matter scorecard. And then the third section of the scorecard is a non-monetary section. It is a section which is about enduring objectives or strategies we want to achieve that won't necessarily generate dollar or monetary outcomes in the financial year we are in.
But is that like preparing you for the next financial years?
Correct, yes, Emily. Yeah. That is absolutely so that the next year's metrics will emanate from those sections.
Yeah.
Our scorecards is very, very simple. We love to call it a plan on a page, a POP.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you've made things like NPS relevant to the individual by making it geographically located. Yeah. Because partly when you're junior in an organisation, so much of your frustration is I've got a KPI that I just simply cannot influence. That it's free cash flow and I'm, driving around the warehouse. So it's great that you've done that and clearly thought about that.
Yeah, and the thing is that first 3 enterprise metrics, it took a lot of education in the beginning for a delivery driver to say, what's got free cash flow anything to do with me? So we spent a lot of time. We said, for a healthy business, whether you're accountant or not, you have to understand how these 3 metrics work. But then for your individual targets, to your point is we will make it as local and as visible and as impactful for you. As in team engagement will be your warehouse immediate engagement scores. It will be your customers in Sydney's net promoter score.
Yeah, makes a big difference.
Marius, sorry, talk to me a little bit, or maybe you can share, well, that's probably a better way to put this. Maybe you can share I suppose the change management side of this as well, right? So, because you've got your scorecards, you've got your ELT rhythms, but you've gone to the extent of having the 1 or 2 things that matter on shop floors. Like it hasn't just been a change management exercise of let's build a dashboard, let's do a little bit of training, and maybe if you're lucky you get a t-shirt and you walk away, right? And I suppose that's what I want to try and get to, because look, I know there's a lot of data leaders on the call. So they're probably, in a different position. They're not the CEO and they're not the service provider like me. But they do have the challenge of if you, and I've been there myself, that you can be spinning your wheels, chasing the 1s and 0s, not really knowing how those 1s and 0s are going to contribute to the business plan. And it can end up being just a training exercise. But you've gone beyond that. It's like a true change management exercise or
Yeah,
adoption exercise.
it's a complete ecosystem, Harsh. What I will share now for those that's on the call and listening. So before I start sharing, just remember, we have a mantra here at Tyremax. We will not let perfection get in the way of progress. So what I'll share now is not something that happened overnight or over a month. We've been going at it now for 2.5 years. So our ways of working in terms of how we interact as a team and how it links to data and our scorecards are completely entwined. And so what does that look like? So we have weekly pipelines. Every functional area which has a standard template which gets filled in prior to it. And we actually, to fill in those templates, we have to use the metrics that matter data. So we actually weekly check in on that and we use that, and it's linked to our performance dashboards also in terms of just how much is the revenue growth. That's the weekly. We have our monthly team huddles and reviews. We actually use the scorecards and the dashboards on a fortnightly basis. We have an all hands that runs for 20 minutes. So we take those 3 essential metrics and we talk to them. So you talk about change management. It's all about repetition. Every Wednesday, every second Wednesday, we have every one of the persons that work in the business that's on a call, and we are talking about return on funds employed, and we're talking about growth. We work through that. We have a senior leadership forum twice a year where we get the 50 most senior leaders in one room and we get them to talk to the metrics that matter in terms of why is it essential, why does it define our future. We have an annual operating cycle. So we start in September now and we have 2-day strategy. Then from there we have revenue day in October. So it's September is strategy, revenue days in October, and earnings days in November. And they all feed into what's the best metrics that will actually future-proof the business. We have a metric review on a quarterly basis where we actually get the next tier down. They come and present at the executive leadership monthly review in that quarter. They come and present how they're performing against their numbers. So the change management is about inclusively setting the targets and the objectives, but then flipping the accountability around onto others so they can start asking the question of curiosity. I have to report on this. I will get measured by this. Please explain this to me. This is in my scorecard. How can I influence it? So it's getting the pendulum to swing from tell us what will make you successful in your role and what does a win look like in your role. And as you get that, you play that back by saying, so this is how we will measure you now in terms of how you're contributing to the end state.
And I suppose from playing the role of your extended data team, we know that, again, using the pun, metrics that matter, it's the work that we're doing matters because it's going to be in some sort of rhythm coming very quickly with somebody trying to present their numbers and I suppose their story around it. So if we don't get it right, there's direct ramifications on that.
Mm-hmm. So the thing is, Harsh,
I do have a
and so just on there's this emerging new role in data science that's called content engineers that help pushing information into AI to get answers out. I personally think that's not a role that's going to be around very long because once it's not the answer, it's asking the right question. And so AI is very good at generating answers, but you have to ask the right questions. And metrics that matter is the typical example of it. Nobody can generate that for you. That's human judgment in terms of what you look at as winning or success.
I got a question here as well from the audience, and it's a very thought out question of how do you design or choose a metric for the business such that it avoids pitfalls associated with Goodhart or Campbell's laws. And what that means is when you make a metric a measure of health or success, it can drive behavior that distorts its usefulness as a metric of health in the first place because people know they're being measured for it. I'll give you an example of this. This is going back quite a few years now. It was like a first time call resolution KPI, which was across the company, and it was I think it was like 98% or or something, and everybody hit the KPI. It was fantastic, and there was great news about it. But the number of complaints and ombudsman complaints increased dramatically, because that was not a measure that somebody was looking at. And what was basically happening was the behavior was calls were being closed at this organization at first time, but they weren't really being resolved. They were just being closed. So it sort of distorted what the company was trying to achieve as a business health. Have you had to go through some of those sort of thinking around, does one metric actually, if not managed, just distorts what we're trying to achieve as a business?
Absolutely. So yeah, actually there's another pitfall, and that is that the metrics are diametrically opposed to one another. So a metric that someone in sales has is diametrically opposed to what somebody in ops is trying to achieve. Now, there's an easier fix for that. So I'll preface this by saying no metric is ever bulletproof. And that's why when it gets to the 3 enterprise metrics, we look at 3 ones, because you can get EBITDA growth and starve the business from cash, or you can generate cash and EBITDA and have no return on your funds employed because you've just overinvested in capital. And so those 3 try to triangulate what a healthy business looks like, and luckily they're straightforward because the listed environment gives us those. But some of the other metrics, they're not perfect, Harsh. We've come across that more than once. So what we tend to do is the first one is segregation of duties. So if you have somebody that's sitting at a call desk, for example, and they have to do a number of outbound calls, yes, measure them on that. But then the calls have to translate into growth, for example. So the sales guy will have a growth objective. And what we will do is, for adjacent roles like that, we'll do a blend over component. So the outbound calls will give a much bigger weight for the let's call it call center. But the sales guy will give that same outbound calls for him also as a metric, but a much smaller weight. And his revenue growth will give a much bigger weight, and then a smaller weight for the revenue growth. So you start joining, by segregation of duties, you start joining the let's call it competing forces. And the outcome is a more balanced approach.
Good. Very good.
But so we got the answer.
It's not an easy one to... Sorry, Emily?
I was having a giggle at the question with the Goodhart's and Campbell's laws. I was like, oh my God, what is the name of that? And I was like, oh, it's just metrics which forces different behaviours, which is always interesting, isn't it? Yeah. We're getting near the end of our call now, so I'm just wondering if there's anything we've missed, Marius, that you think is really important and key to anyone else considering this. And I've got one other question in terms of the actual dashboard. So Ignite have shown me what the dashboards look like, and for me, that would just be awesome to have that to manage your own business. I love the fact that you can look week on week, and then you can also look at, year against year, so constantly tracking where you're sitting. Does everyone in the organisation get access to their own dashboard, or is it still just left? So whatever level I am, I can go in and see how I'm tracking.
So the one refinement, Emily, which we haven't been able to implement, which is a next evolution journey for us, is the cube in its current format can't be stratified based on user seniority. So the live within a web portal, that we can't give access to everybody, because there's certain either information not relevant, or there's some sensitive information for a specific one. So the line manager...
So just for the record, it was just a screenshot I saw here. They haven't given me...
No, that's all right. So internally what we would do is we would and Ignite built this facility, and we can take a customized view, which gets saved, and then the manager would just export that section and give it to the team, and they use that in their scorecards.
Okay.
In an ideal world,
generation is you'll make it so that Emily logs on and sees hers.
Yes, Emily logs on and Emily sees only hers. But that's actually not a limitation on Ignite, more than our payroll system and our HRA system that can allow the grading and stratification.
I can imagine, but that'll be amazing when you can do that. Because I feel like that could just end that behavioural thing. That'll make everyone understand exactly what they're doing.
Now, Marius, you've come from I suppose, a data background, as in you've been a numbers numbers person for a
Yeah.
long time, right? So I might ask you to put, I suppose, two hats on. One is obviously as the CEO of a company, as a leader of a company, right? And maybe there's other leaders out there listening to this who, and there can be frustration in the data space, like especially with all the hype and stuff, because it's sort of, it's quite overwhelming. Like, what would your advice be to, I suppose, the business leaders who are trying to maximize what they're trying to get out of data?
I would encourage them to, there's a lovely book around Andy Grove from Intel in the 70s that started with Peter Drucker's work around metrics that matter and moved that into OKRs. And they talk about how important is it to keep it simple, because you can lose yourself in data. Don't get the definition sets overcomplicated. Don't get the calculations overcomplicated. And I say this easy in words, but it takes time. You know, for us, till before we engaged Ignite, it was almost a year of us talking through which is the metrics that matter the most. Lots of conversation by thought leaders in the business, kind of just constantly forcing down, you know, will this give clarity? Will this be simple? Does it align people? And even after a year of contemplation and discussion, once we went live with it and into the scorecards, there's still a lot of change management and everything that goes around it. And even then, we still tweaked. We continue to tweak it. We don't just start, but don't make it complicated.
I suppose the second part of that, which is just flip it the other side, where you've got data people who are frustrated with their leaders, right? What would your advice be to, you know, heads of BI, heads of data who just like basically might have the sentiment, geez, our leadership team has no idea how to run this business?
Oh, harsh. That's a tough one. I actually don't even know how to answer that.
Maybe they need to ask the question of what metrics that matter.
Yeah. It's if I was a data analyst in the business, I would encourage the conversation, the courageous conversation of saying, instead of changing all the time and creating ambiguity through change, can we go slower before we go faster to make sure we have got the right metric that will truly matter?
Good.
And surely it's in the idea of why. You know, when a data leader is asked by a senior leader for information, the first question should be, what do you want to do with that? Why do you want that data? You know, because that gets to that metric that matters. You know, what is it you're trying to measure?
Absolutely, Emily. And then unfortunately, there's this thing that's emerged within the data world, which I hate, which is called self-serve or self-management, which is the most dangerous thing ever. It's like, we'll tailor a cube for you and you can go and play yourself. Then you've lost already. If you can't see the business and its pulse through 5 or 6 key elements, it's overcomplicated.
Yeah. Well, that's why you focus on cash flow, right? That's business 101. And so many organizations that are unsuccessful don't do that.
Marius, there's one more question here, which I think we could probably joint answer, which is around leveraging data governance and metrics catalog tools. And I know what we did was, because again, you had, I suppose, really sort of simplified the metric that matter for the business plan. We took a very sort of simplified approach to, in all the visualizations, making sure there was a about this page. So we had like glossaries, etc., that kept it very simple. It goes back to your original point around, because you've done a lot of the hard work around simplifying the metrics that matter, it actually avoided to some extent the need for very complex governance tools as such.
100% harsh. And then the other thing is and this is where I got to give your team also credit. Beyond you guys being very tight on scope and making sure we land timelines and cost, the other thing that really we as business are as guilty as many other businesses, we like to go into solution mode. We like to create things. And so documenting along the way is not one of our strengths, especially when you want to reflectively look at why this metric or why do we measure it this way. And there Ignite has taught us a lesson amongst that glossary to actually define, this is where the source data is, this is where it comes along, this is where the assumptions, this is why we're using this calculation. And we found that quite gold, to the point that it's an internal practice now. When we consider a change or a new metric, we actually say, okay, let's be very clear on the definition and let's make sure we keep it clean, because in 6 months' time, somebody's going to ask, so why is it that we use gross sales in this calculation? And then the genesis of that metric gets lost.
Marius, we're over time, which is great. But just a bit of a reflection as well from my side around. It's very interesting the way we've partnered together, because we did the, I suppose, MVP, if you want to call it that, or the first proof of value, which was the exec dashboard, which got your LT on the same page, and then metrics that matter, that we've talked about. And interestingly, you did those at a time when you were going through business change, through acquisitions, etc. You're going now in a big sort of, I suppose, ERP transformation. And then come early next year, we're talking about the analytics pathway, where we actually look at the data platforming, etc. Which for us was extremely refreshing, because it wasn't about, let's just build the data platform first and hopefully integrate it with an ERP that's moving, and then somewhere along the line we will get our, I suppose, metrics that matter out of it. So again, I think we both aligned very much on that approach when you first mentioned it. And was that again just timing, or was it you'd thought through, look, I want to get the business on the same page first before we start just investing?
The who is more important than the what. And so when you have a cracking team, to get everybody to row in the same direction, I have 4 very simple things the way I run the business. The first one is obsessive clarity, which metrics that matter talk to that. The second thing is simplicity, keep everything simple. Metrics that matter talk to that. The next one, metrics that matter unlock, and that is alignment, making sure everybody, so if everybody knows where we're going, everybody can easily calculate or see it themselves. The third one is getting everybody to row in the same direction. And the last one is the march, is the daily innocuous tempo that you keep in the business, which metrics that matter help with that. And so to achieve those 4 things, you don't need fancy data platforms, you don't need ERP systems, etc. Just make a start. As those other things come along, technology only enables, but technology won't give you those 4 things. That's pure leadership approach. And so when we engaged Ignite, we knew the transformation continues. We've got a huge ERP go live. That's also creating some excitement and anxiety, depending on where you sit. But metrics that matter is the North Star. With the North Star gives us, we just know what we've got to do every single day.
I think that's a perfect point to finish.
I feel like that too. Thank you, Marius. And thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
Marius.
to my guests.
Thank you, Em. And we'll send out the notes and stuff and the video and stuff once we've had a look at it. Marius, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks once again. I know you've got a busy schedule to take time out for us.
See you,
Thank you.
Bye-bye.